Hello everyone, and welcome to another KeenGamer review. Today, we're looking at the Thrustmaster Eswap X Pro controller. So let's get started. First, the unboxing experience is excellent. The premium packaging functions as well as it displays. Magnetic tabs hold the lid down, which opens up and reveals the controller immediately. An innovative foam brace secures the sticks to prevent damage to the controller, and foam pads on the lid hold the controller in place during transportation. Inside the box is instructional media, the controller, convex thumb pad options, a soft carrying bag, a small screwdriver, and the long, braided micro USB cord. Now for the specs. The Thrustmaster Eswap X Pro comes with swappable thumbsticks and directional controls to be switched wherever one wishes. You could even put both thumbsticks on a single side should that suit your fancy. 4 programmable buttons on the rear, which can be easily mapped to any button on the controller using the onboard mapping buttons. It also has 2 profiles that can save presets and can be switched to on the fly. It has a mechanical customizable trigger stop that cuts the trigger travel in half, and it has its own onboard mic mute and headset volume controls. First impressions of the controller are intriguing. Having been a console player for many years and owning my fair share of both wired and wireless controllers, the Eswap X Pro weighed more than any wired controller I've handled. The dimensions are barely wider than a stock Xbox controller, although the wings that fit into the base of your palm feel slightly slimmer. There are 6 buttons on the small edge where the headphone jack is located, 3 for volume and mic controls, and 3 for remapping of the buttons and profiles. It was then that I realized just how much Thrustmaster packed into a single controller. It also explained why a wired controller without a battery might weigh more than a standard Xbox controller with a battery. In my opinion, the weight is not a bad thing, but something that speaks of its quality. It's not burdensome, and it feels good in your hand. Despite the width of the controller being within millimeters of a standard Xbox controller, it feels wider. Years of gaming with the controller in one's hand builds an intuition when something is slightly different. Picking up the controller for the first time, it felt like my hands were further apart than the specs might tell you. There's also minor details that might not seem like a large difference, but are noticeable during gaming. For example, the thumbsticks are 2 millimeters taller than a normal Xbox controller. Those with smaller thumbs might find the extra reach something to get used to, and those with larger hands who already think the Xbox controller is too small will enjoy the taller controls. A good example of the engineering that went into this controller is the wired connection into the device. It uses a micro USB, which is infamous for wearing out over time. Instead of simply placing a micro USB connection on the front and leaving it at that, Thrustmaster built a plastic connection around it. The plastic brace prevents damage of both the cable and the connection on the controller. The Eswap X Pro looks great. The plastics do not appear or feel cheap, and the sticks have a metallic and slightly gold finish to them, which gives it a luxurious flair. That being said, looks are another thing which can be customized. Thrustmaster offers additional green and blue themed side panels, triggers, thumbsticks, and directional pads, which can be mixed and matched to create a controller that is completely unique. The Eswap X Pro feels brilliant inside one's hand. The trigger springs are appropriately weighty, and the texture on the front provides grip. The thumbstick's resistance is similar to stock, however, my senses told me they were a tad lighter than I'm used to. The buttons are clicky and tactile. The audible clicks they make is satisfying, and I immediately took to liking them more than the normal experience. The vanilla Xbox controller buttons feel mushy and soft in comparison to the Eswap X Pro. I was concerned about the buttons on the back of the controller being too small to find while gaming. However, they line up naturally with one's middle finger. All 4 are within reach and have the right amount of pressure to be easily, but not too easily, pressed. I never had any accidental rear switch activations while gaming. I found that it was actually better for them to be on the smaller side. Any larger and they might have gotten in the way of the way one grips the controller. The ability to swap switches to your desired position changes the game completely. For those who have an Xbox, but wish to have the layout of a PlayStation controller, the Eswap X Pro allows you to orient the thumbsticks to that position. Not all hands are the same, and some people prefer the symmetrical stick design. Exchanging the switches is easy and painless, only requiring the included tool for the directional pad. The magnetic attachment of all customizable parts on the controller is modern and reliable. The mapping of the controls to rear buttons is remarkably easy as well. Just press the mapping button on the front edge of the controller and press the button you want to map and the button you are mapping to at the same time. It takes no longer than a few seconds. There are 2 onboard profiles that remember which selections you've made. They are also changeable on the fly with the press of a button. Thrustmaster made changing buttons and profiles as simple as possible. The trigger limiters are mechanical and about as simple as it gets. 2 switches located on the underside of the controller determine the travel length of the triggers. They limit the travel to about half of their full length. This creates a faster, more responsive trigger experience. It is especially useful for games where sensitivity and speed is a must. The included volume controls and mute button make adjusting volume and muting your headset mic more simple than trying to find the inline controls on the wire of the headset. It is far easier to hit a mute button your thumb is only inches away from instead of trying to find the mute button on the headset in the middle of a match. The functions of the Eswap X Pro expand even more when connected to the PC. Thrustmaster software suite allows for even more specific controller tuning. It allows for finer control over thumbstick sensitivity and dead zones. The controller's profile can be directly managed from the app and changed through the app as well. The trigger sensitivity can also be adjusted to activate sooner in the pull. Even the vibrations can be customized to as little or as much as you wish in the zone that you want. With the additional power of Thrustmapper on PC, the controller becomes even more customizable and valuable. Perhaps the most convincing argument for using the Eswap X Pro is for all its customizability and extra buttons, it feels natural to use. If someone were to tell me that a single controller had swappable switches, its own sound controls, additional buttons on the back, and mechanically adjustable triggers, I'd be expecting some Frankenstein monstrosity which was too bulky to use properly. Instead, the Eswap X Pro is remarkably constrained and compact. It uses every bit of space for functionality and does it well. Honestly, the only thing that the Eswap X Pro has going against it is that it is wired. Wired controllers are becoming more and more a thing of the past, and the fact that this must be tethered, albeit very sturdily, must be considered. Even the stock Xbox controller is wireless and more convenient than a tethered controller. The Xbox Pro controller, which is quite similar to the Eswap X Pro, is wireless, with some of the same features but without the volume abilities and swappable switches. Thrustmaster went with the moddability option instead of the wireless option and also manages to do it at about $20 less. Still, it would have been icing on the cake if it had been wireless. For what it's worth though, the cord is braided and quite long to keep from limiting one's reach. Overall, the Eswap X Pro controller defends its spot as one of the finest, sturdiest, and most precise controllers I've played with to date. Its functionality and moddability is second to none, with more features than even the top tier controllers out there right now. Thrustmaster has designed one heck of a controller that eliminates distractions your hands would otherwise have to deal with. With so many features and capabilities, the Eswap X Pro will bring out the best in your gaming. And after using the Eswap X Pro for a week, returning to a normal controller feels like I'm being held back.